So today's daf is daf Samach Beis. Omer of Nachman, the last three words on Samach Alpha Mid Beis. And just by way of introduction, most of today's daf is about birds that we don't know what they are. We're just reading their names. And Rav Nachman makes the following statement. Hayabaki bahem ubishmosehem. This is the introduction of Rav Nachman, which we'll explain after we read the next four words. Of haba b'simon echad. Tahar, 5 words. In other words, if you find a bird that has one of the four simonim of an of tahar, of a kosher bird, it does not have any of the other three simonim, only one out of four, then if you can identify a peres and oznia, and you know that this bird that you're looking at now is neither a peres nor oznia, tahar, because you know that it's not a peres and oznia, which are the only two ophos tmeim that have one simon tahara. So, in other words, the ophos that have one simon tahara that are tmeim are only the peres and the oznia. Therefore, ipso facto, if you find any other bird of another species, you know it's not peres and oznia, and it possesses one single sign, then you know it's tar. Rashi adds over here that it's not enough that you are a baki, that you can expert in identifying the peres and oznia, but you also have to know the names peres v'oznia, and you have to identify this species of bird as a peres, and this has oznia, and they have, as we said before, one simon tara. You find a bird that's neither this nor that. It's not a peres or an oznia. It has one simon tara. Then you know for sure it's tar. However, lo hayabaki b'mishmosehem, and you'll see where he adds the baki b'hem b'shmosehem. But if he was not an expert, he cannot identify neither the peres nor the oznia, then b'siman echad tameh. He has to raise the possibility that maybe this bird, this species that he found, is in fact either the peres or oznia, which is listed in the Torah explicitly as ophos tmeim, and the bird that he found only has one simon tara, so it's a candidate possibly for being either oznia or peres. And he doesn't know whether it's an oznia or peres or not, because he can't identify an oznia or peres. So this might in fact be a peres or oznia. Later on, the Gemara is going to present a different opinion that peres oznia is so rare that you don't even have to worry about it. But anyway, b'shnei simoni tar. Now, there's only one bird, one species of bird that's listed amongst, let's call it, the 24 species of birds in the Torah that's Tomei, and has two Simone Tara. It has 2 out of 4. And that's the Orev. We'll soon see that there are many different types of Orev. But now he finds a bird, a species, that has 2 Simone Tahar. Then if he can identify the Orev, and he knows that this species that he's looking at now is not an Orev, since the Orev is the only species of bird that is listed as an oftame and has 2 simonim out of 4, and he knows that this one that he found is not an Orev of any sort, of any type, and it has 2 simoni tara, then he can eat it. He knows it's tar. Rashi points out that today in our day we don't rely on simonim at all. We don't know how to identify these simonim exactly. So the Gemara asks the following question: are you telling me that it's only the Orev? There are many different types of Orev. Orev v'sulov asani, we learned in a brisa. Orev za Orev, right? When the Torah specifically mentions the Orev, that's the Orev. But then it says lemino. And the Torah adds the word lemino to tell us that there are other birds that are equal to and belong to like an extended species of Orev. And what does this extended lemino bird, what does it look like? Omer, Rabbi Lezer Omer, lahavias zarzir. So there's a bird called a zarzir that's closely aligned and very similar to the orev, and it has two simone kashrus, lacking the other two. And Rabbi Eliezer said that you're not allowed to eat a zarzir because it is in the extent it belongs to the extended family of the orev, and that's called lemino. Amalol Rabbi Eliezer, wait a minute, we were in Kfar Tamarta, which is in Yehuda, and Hayu Ochlim Osa, they were eating this bird called the zarzir. And what led them to the conclusion that this is a kosher bird? Mipnei sheyesh lahem zefek. You may recall way back on Daf Samach, we spoke about the zefek called the crop, where some of the digestion is going on, and then it sort of regurgitates it for the purpose of feeding its young. And apparently this zarzir that was eaten by the Anshe Kfar Tamarta also was not a dores, which is another one of the simone kash of Tahar, because any oaf that's a dores, and again, there's a gigantic controversy about what exactly is a dores, a predatory bird. Rashi says it has something to do with the way it grabs onto its food before it eats it. That oaf is automatically ipso facto tame. So out of the four simonim of, let's say, tuma, one of the four is automatic. It's absolute, and that's dori. So now he finds these people in Kfar Tamar to find a bird that's called a zarzir. They notice that it has a zefek, which is one of the simoni of tar. They know it's not a predatory bird. It's not a dores. And they had no idea that this belongs to the family of the Orev. Omalahem. So when they reported to Rabbi Eliezer, you're telling me that this is an of Tame, we know that in this community they have a tradition and they eat it. Omalahem afhei nasirim litenes adin. They will be punished for eating this zarzir, meaning I'm not going to budge from my position, my ruling. And this is an extended family of the Orev, and it's Tame. Now, this is the first interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer's drasha of Lemino. Davar Acher, another interpretation of Lemino, is Lemino Lahavi Snunis Levana. Again, if we had a whiteboard, we'd have to write this up on the board because we're going to come back to this later, so we might as well write it on the board. Is something called a white snunis. And the white snunis, although it doesn't necessarily have the same identical simonim of the Orev, you remember that the Orev have two simonim, but there are four simonim. Snunis also, the snus halavana, we'll see there are other types of snunis, but the snus halavana at least has two simoni kashrus, not necessarily the same two simoni kashrus as the Orev. And the word lumineu now is not extending the species of Orev, but extending the status of an Oftame to those species that have two simone kashrus or taro, even though they don't have the same two as the Orev. And that's Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer is absolutely lechumra in forbidding eating the snunis levana derived from lemineu because it has two simone tara, according to the second lishna of Rabbi Eliezer. Amrulo, now that you've established, Rabbi Eliezer, that we can eat the bird called a snunis halavana, what am I going to do with the Anshe Glil ha'elyon? They live in the upper Galilee. Ochlino, so they eat it. And why? Because they came to the conclusion that Neshek Kurkavano Niklaf, one of the four simone of Tahar, is that you could peel off. We'll have to see exactly how you peel it off soon in the Gemara, but you could peel off the layer of skin that covers the gizzard. And in addition, they knew that the snir ha-levana does not, let's call it, it's not a dores, whatever that means, that it's not a dores. So snunis ha-levana was eaten there in the upper Galilee. Omar lehem, again, the same business. Af hein asidim litein esadin. Now, the interesting thing about litein esadin is they were mistaken about this. And apparently Rabbi Eliezer holds that since Lemineu teaches me that any species of bird that has two simone kashas, doesn't matter which one they have, it keilu belongs to the orev and it's an oftame. It's not at all an orev. Therefore, they should have known better. I guess they were ignorant of the law. They should have learned the law before they ate the bird, and they will be judged. So now it comes out that we have a problem with Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was the one who says that if you find a species of oaf that has two of the simone tara, and you know to identify that it's not an orev, you're allowed to eat it. But that's not really so, because although it's true that the orev has two simone tara, there are other species of birds that have two simone tara, and yet they were included under oftame through the ribui of the word lemineu, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And therefore, the Gemara now reinterprets Rav Nachman to say that it's not enough that you know this is not an orev, this bird that you identify that as two simonim, but orev v'chol min orev. It's not similar at all to an orev, which would mean, number one, according to the first lishna, it's not a zarzir, and according to the second lishna, it's not a snunis levana. Now, Meimar is going to disagree. Omar Meimar, Hilchasa, Of haba b'simon echad tahar v'hu delo doris. In other words, Meimar seems to assume that the list of ofos tmeim in the Torah is an exhaustive list. And if you find a different species, as long as it's not a dores, because as we indicated before, a dores is an automatic ipso facto identification of the bird as an oaf tummy. But if it's not an oaf that's dores, and it has one simon tara, now, why does it need one simon tara if it's not a dores? That itself is one simon tara. But I believe that what Meimar has in mind is that we don't know whether it's a dores or not a dores. We've never seen this species dores, so it doesn't exhibit that kind of behavior pattern on a regular basis. And now we're going to look to see if it has any one of the other simonim. Like, for example, we saw the case of snunis levana, and they were eating it in the Galil because kurkavano niklaf, which means that It had one of the simone tahara, and it was not a dores. Therefore, they ate it. I'm just trying to think. Just give me a sec. Does this defend the Kfar Tamarta guys who ate the zarzir? Just 1 second. Oh yeah, and then we get to the zarzir that has a zefek. So we know that the zarzir has never exhibited any predatory kind of behavior pattern. It's not a dores, and it has one simon, which is a zefek. In the case of the Snuninis Levana, it has a zefek, so we can justify, according to Meimer, those minhagim who in the various places they ate those birds. But now the Gemara is not happy with Meimer because Omer Rav Ashi had Rav Nachman Mai. What are you going to say about Rav Nachman? Rav Nachman said that if you have two simone tara, for example, you have the zefek and the eno dores, or alternatively, you have the kurkono niklaf, the eno dores, then you have to make sure it's not the oznia or the peres, because the oznia and the peres have two simone tara. And if you can't identify them, then any species that you find that you can identify as two simanim, but you can't identify and exclude the possibility that it's a uzni or a peres. Amalei, so Meimar defends himself and says, Lo shmiele, klama lo svirle. My ika mishum peres v'oznia, lesnu b'yishu. We don't have to worry about the possibility that this species that we found that has two simone tara is either a peres or a znia, because peres and znia never come into the rural urban area. They're out there in the midbar. That's where they fly around. So we don't have to even worry about the possibility of a znia or a peres. So we have now, to sum it up, a machlokas between Rav Nachman and Ameimar. Rav Nachman says that two simone tara is not ipso facto an oaf tar that you're allowed to eat. You have to identify an uznia or a peres. Whereas according to Ameimar, the very fact that we live in the Yishuv, in a populated area, that itself means that we won't find a peres or uznia here in our neighborhood. Amar Rav Yehuda, of hamisoret kosher litaras mitzora. Now, in the process of purifying a mitzora, we have to have a bird that we send out, and that bird has to be a kosher bird. And this is all in Vayikra Perek Yud Dalet. The Torah doesn't tell us which bird of the kosher birds will be valid for this procedure of Taras HaMitzorah. We only know from Torah Shabbal Peh that it's got to be what's called a tzipar dror, which means a bird that flies freely even in a house. And you can't capture it because it flies from one corner of the house to the other corner of the house. And Rav Yehuda here says that, you know which bird is kosher? It's the Snunis Levana. And that Snunis Levana, we said, according to Rabbi Eliezer, was an oaf tameh. You're not allowed to eat it. But Nechleku ba Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim, and the Chachamim said that you're allowed to eat it. And we're going to paskin like the Chachamim, and therefore we could use it as a valid tzipar dror for the purpose of Taras HaMitzorah. But now we find out that this Nunis bird has many different subspecies. Omar Meimar, Bechivra Karsa. The belly of the bird, which is called the keres, is white. Right? Mechuver always means white. In such a case, according to Meimer, again, we have to write this on the whiteboard. Kuli alma lo pligi disharia. Everybody agrees that if the belly is white, then there's no machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham, and all will agree unanimously that you're allowed to eat that bird. Ki pligi, where does Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim have a controversy, debate? That's bidirokna kresa. The belly is yellow. Rabbi Eliezer osav rabbanon sharu v'hilchsak Rabbi Eliezer, and in fact, we're going to accept the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore an oaf hamisaret whose belly is yellow is an oaf tummy. We're not allowed to eat it, and you can't use it for taras hamitzorah. So this is the way Meimar's ruling was transmitted. If the belly is white, and again, we're talking about the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham regarding a sinunis, then everybody agrees you're allowed to eat this bird, and the machlokas is going to be with regard to the sinunis whose belly is yellow. Rabbi Eliezer osar Chacham matirim, and we're going to paskin l'chumra like Rabbi Eliezer, and that's only because the sinunis has a yellow belly. Mar Zutra Masnil, he has a different presentation of a Meimar, and that is B'dirokna Kresa Kuliyamalo Pligidios. You just told me that the Chachamim would be matir if the belly of the snunis is yellow. No. That's not so. The Rabbanan will tell us that even though the belly of the snunis is yellow, Rabbi Eliezer would say that even though the belly of the snunis is yellow, nevertheless it's also kipligi. So which case do the Chachamim say that it's mutter? B'di chivare kreis in the white-bellied snunis. Rabbi Eliezer asar and Rabbanan Sharu, V'hilchasal Rabbanan Deshar. The maskon of this Gemara so far is that if the belly is white, then everybody would agree that it's awesome. Just 1 second. If it's the belly is white, everyone agree lahalacha, like the Chachamim, that it's mutter. But on the other hand, in the case of a Yeroka, which is a kind of greenish yellow belly, then everybody agrees that it's awesome. Even the Chacham agree that it's awesome. So the Gemara says the fine Bishlem Lamandi Yomi B'chivara Kreisa Pligi, according to Meimar in the first presentation of Meimar, that if there's a white belly, then we have Machlok Shin Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim, and Hainu the Ketani, and that's what we had in the Brisa. We said Zuhi Snunis Levana, meaning that it's called Levana because its belly is white. And this is the subject of the Machlokas. Elaman Diyomer B'dirokna Pligi. But if you're going to tell me that the whole machlokus is with regard to a yellow-bellied sinunis, but as far as so, wait a minute. Well, who are we up to? We're up to Mar Zutra. If you're going to tell me that the machlokus is with regard to a dirokna we said was the belly is yellow. So why does it say in the Brisa, Zuhi Snunis Levana? As if to say the machlokus is about a white-bellied snunis. Lafuki de bati de uchmarti. There's such a thing as a third category of a snunis, and that's a black snunis, which apparently is like a domesticated kind of bird. And it nests in crevices and walls of buildings, Rashi says. It's completely black, and everybody agrees that it's us. So at the end of the day, we have three different subcategories of snooze. Omar Rachman, Rabbi Yehuda, Tasil. We don't know what a tasil is. But apparently a tasil is one of two birds, a species of birds. It's either a tar or it's a bnei yona. These are the two birds that are brought on the mizbeach, the only two birds. And the difference in halacha is that a tur is a more mature bird, whereas a yona is, the Torah always uses the term bnei yona to indicate that it's a young, immature bird. And Rabbi Yehuda is quoted as saying that a tasil is pasul mishum torim v'kosher mishum bnei yona. That if you want to bring it on the mizbeach, it has the status of a ben yona, meaning that you can offer it on the mizbeach as a ben yona because it hasn't reached its maturity, and therefore it's an acceptable, valid ben yona karma. Now we have another bird, the atzifi v'torin shel rochva. Sheira mishum torin, upsula mishum bnei yona. So these two birds, one is called the datzifi, the other is called the torin shel rechava. Rechava is like an outside area, and they are torin, which means that they are more mature, and you cannot bring them as bnei yona because bnei yona are very young, immature birds or pigeons. Masiv Rav Daniel Bar Ktina. And now we quote a Mishnah in the 9th parak of Para. Okay, now let's give a little bit of introduction and then we'll turn to Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis. The Torah says that when you create a concoction called mechatos, then it has to be from mayim, water that was never used for any constructive purposes. But let's say you take water and you feed it to a bird, and as the bird is drinking the water, some of it dribbles out of its mouth into the receptacle where the rest of the water is. And in such a case, all the water becomes invalid, pasul, for the mechatas. That's the introduction.